The Blitzkrieg against Poland had been a stunning success for Adolf Hitler. He had subdued an entire country in less than 4 weeks, and he was hungry for more. So he ordered his generals to plan to attack the British and French in November 1939, less than 2 months after the fall of Poland. His general staff was appalled. The bulk of the German army was still out east and had to be moved west. And there had been some serious losses in the Polish campaign. Lessons had to be learned. Polish anti-tank guns had destroyed a division's worth of the lightly armored panzers. A quarter of the aircraft used had been lost. The panzers were too light and unreliable, and they had frequently outrun both their supply columns and the marching infantry. Reluctantly, after furious arguments, Hitler agreed to wait until the following spring. Meanwhile, his enemies were also learning lessons. Britain had thought that bombers would be a key weapon in the coming conflict. But when on September the 4th, Britain's Royal Air Force made a daylight raid on German shipping, 7 of the 30 bombers were shot down. It soon became clear that this wasn't a one-off misfortune. In some raids, over half the aircraft were lost. British bombers just weren't up to the job. So the RAF switched to night raids, and they decided to drop not bombs but leaflets, so as not to provoke retaliation. So, with the Blitzkrieg stalled and the air war quiet, the focus now went to the one remaining arena, the sea. Germany's navy was still in the middle of an ambitious building program that wasn't due to finish until 1948. The commander of its submarine arm, Admiral Karl Dönitz, planned to cut Britain's supply routes across the Atlantic. For this, he wanted 300 ocean-going submarines, but he had just 38. Nevertheless, Dönitz ensured that all available U-boats were at sea on September the 3rd, the first day of the war against Britain. That evening, believing it to be an armed merchant cruiser, U-30 sank the liner Athenia without any warning. A 112 lives were lost, including 26 American citizens. The Royal Navy dwarfed its German counterpart. It had 12 battleships. Germany had none. It had 5 aircraft carriers. Germany, again, had none. So after the Athenia, Britain declared a total blockade of German ports. But for all its size, the Royal Navy had too few escort vessels. Many merchant ships had to sail alone. And by the end of 1939, more than 100 had been sunk. It quickly became apparent that the British had woefully underestimated the submarine threat. On September the 17th, U-29 sank the British aircraft carrier Courageous. On October the 14th, the battleship Royal Oak was sunk when U-47 slipped through the defences of the British main fleet base at Scapa Flow in the Orkneys. Meanwhile, Germany's small surface fleet had also been unleashed against the sea lanes. In the North Sea, the battle cruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau intercepted a convoy on November the 22nd. They sank its escort, the armed merchant cruiser Rawalpindi. But it was the pocket battleship Graf Spee which caused the greatest problems. Designed specifically for commerce raiding, its 11-inch guns could overwhelm any ship fast enough to overtake it, and it had the speed to escape from any battleship. The Graf Spee had slipped away from Germany before hostilities began. Soon it was cutting loose in the South Atlantic and Indian Oceans. Finally, 3 British cruisers, Exeter, Ajax and Achilles, intercepted it off the River Plate on the east coast of South America. The British ships damaged the pocket battleship so badly that it had to take refuge in the neutral Uruguayan port of Montevideo. The Germans were then fooled into thinking that a more powerful British force had arrived. When the Graf Spee was commanded to leave port, her captain scuttled her rather than risk annihilation. Back home, the Royal Navy crews were feted as heroes. But this was just about the only obvious success enjoyed by the British or French armed forces during the winter of 1939. Though the British did enjoy one secret victory in the technological war, which was to prove vital. As soon as the war began, Britain began to lose large numbers of ships to German mines. What was so mysterious was that the ships didn't seem to have actually struck them. The mines had simply exploded as the ships passed nearby. Then, on the night of November the 22nd, 1939, a German plane was spotted dropping a mine at low tide in the Thames estuary. Disarmed and rescued from the mud, the mine was found to be set off by the magnetic signature of a ship passing close by. The solution was to reduce a ship's magnetic signature by hanging a copper cable round the hull and then passing an electric current through it, a process called degaussing. Once degaussing was applied to all ships, the danger from the magnetic mine was massively reduced. But otherwise, as 1940 began, the war was quiet. The two sides did little during the winter except to patrol, train, and try to keep warm, for it was a particularly cold one. An American journalist called it the phony war. For the Germans, it was the Sitzkrieg. In the spring, the British Expeditionary Force took up its position towards the left of the front on the Belgian border. But it was dwarfed by its French ally. France had some 100 divisions along the Belgian and German frontiers or in reserve nearby. This imbalance meant that the British commander, Lord Gort, had to go along with the ideas of the French general Maurice Gamelin. And these were entirely defensive. French hopes were pinned on the massive ramparts of the Maginot Line. A series of fortifications, it ran from Switzerland to Belgium along the French-German border. The Maginot Line was considered to be completely impassable and would ensure that French territory remained safe. But otherwise, the Allies had no idea of how actually to defeat Germany. Instead, they brought up their forces and prepared for a repeat of World War I. They would blockade Germany to sap its strength, and they would dig in, ready to grind down the assault which they knew must come. None of their commanders seemed to consider that the Germans might have totally different ideas, or that the next moves might come in a completely different arena. Scandinavia.